August 5th, 1945, Hiroshima, Japan. The air is thick with summer heat, the kind that clings to skin and makes breathing feel like work. Along the Motoyasu River, children are playing in the shallows, their laughter cutting through the cicada drone that fills the evening. The water is warm, almost bath water, carrying the scent of river mud and distant cooking fires. In 1,000 homes across the city, families are preparing dinner with whatever rations they can gather: sweet potato leaves, a handful of rice, perhaps a small piece of fish if fortune has smiled. Hiroshima has been lucky. That's what people say to each other in the markets, in the factories, in the quiet moments before sleep. While other cities burn, Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, Hiroshima remains. The American bombers pass overhead nearly every night now, their engines a distant rumble that sends people to shelters out of habit more than fear. But they never stop here. The city has become a kind of refuge, swelling with evacuees from the coastal regions, with families seeking safety in a place that war seems to have forgotten. No one knows why they've been spared. Some believe it's the rivers, 7 of them threading through the city like arteries, making aerial targeting too difficult. Others whisper that the Americans are saving Hiroshima for their own use after the invasion, that they want it intact for occupation headquarters. A few, mostly the old women who remember other wars, say nothing at all. They know that luck is a cruel companion in wartime. It stays until it doesn't. In a small house near the Aioi Bridge, Sachiko Tanaka is braiding her daughter's hair. Emiko is 7 years old, restless with the energy that even malnutrition cannot fully suppress. Her hair is fine and dark, slipping through her mother's fingers like water. The girl wants to know if she can go to school tomorrow. She wants to know if her father, somewhere in Manchuria, is thinking of them. She wants to know 100 things, the way children do when the world still makes sense to them. "Tomorrow," Sachiko says, her voice carrying that particular tone of promise that mothers use. "Tomorrow you can help me in the garden. We'll check if the tomatoes are ready." It is a small promise, unremarkable, the kind made 1,000 times a day across the city. "I'll meet you at noon. I'll save you the last of the miso. I'll be home before dark. I'll see you tomorrow." Words that assume a future that looks like the past, that believe in the persistence of small routines, that trust in the gentle arc of ordinary days. Emiko nods, already planning which tomato she'll pick first. Her mother ties off the braid with a piece of salvaged string and pulls her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, sweet and dusty and alive. The moment stretches. Outside, the cicadas crescendo. The river flows. The evening settles into night like every other evening before it. Across the city, promises are being made. A young soldier, home on brief leave, tells his mother he'll write more often. An elderly man promises his wife he'll finally fix the sliding door that's been sticking since spring. A teacher promises her students they'll finish reading the story tomorrow, that she'll explain the ending they're all waiting for. A teenage boy promises his younger brother he'll teach him to swim this weekend in the calm water beneath the willow trees. These promises are made without ceremony. They are not vows or oaths. They do not feel important in the moment of their making. They are the architecture of daily life, the invisible scaffolding that holds the ordinary world together. They assume time. They assume tomorrow. In a factory on the edge of the city, night shift workers are changing places with the day crew. A woman named Haruko is finishing her shift at the communications cable plant. Her hands are raw from 12 hours of work. Her back aches, but she promised her sister she'd stop by on the way home, that she'd check on her sister's children while their mother rests. It's just a few blocks out of her way, a small detour, a kept promise before sleep. At the Hiroshima prefectural office, a clerk named Kenji is staying late, finishing reports that should have been done yesterday. He's working by candlelight now. Electricity is rationed, and he's exceeded his quota. The characters blur in the flickering light. He rubs his eyes. Just a few more pages, just a few more promises kept before going home. The city is full of these small commitments, these threads of intention that bind people to each other and to the future. They are what make society possible, what make trust possible, what make tomorrow possible. Every promise made is an act of faith that the person will remember, that circumstances will allow, that the world will still be recognizable when the time comes to fulfill the pledge. The night air cools slightly. In gardens across Hiroshima, tomatoes hang heavy on their vines, not quite ready, but close. Mothers tuck children to bed. Husbands and wives exchange the habitual good-night words that long marriages produce. The city breathes in its sleep, 700,000 lungs drawing the same humid air, the same assumption of continuity. High above the Pacific Ocean, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay is being loaded with a single bomb. The men working on the tarmac at Tinian Island don't know what it contains, only that it weighs 9,000 pounds and has a name stenciled on its casing, Little Boy. The bomb bay doors are specially modified. Everything about this mission is unique, but the crew has been trained not to ask questions. They check systems, fuel lines, engines. They make their own promises, to follow orders, to complete the mission, to come home. In Hiroshima, no one knows about Tinian Island. No one knows about uranium-235 or critical mass or the physics of fission. They know about rice shortages and air raid drills and the ache of missing family members. They know about the small promises that make each day bearable. The last hours before dawn are the quietest. The cicadas sleep. The river flows with barely a whisper. In the Tanaka house, Sachiko lies awake, listening to her daughter's breathing. In the darkness, she makes another promise, this one silent, to no one and to everyone. Let tomorrow be ordinary. Let us check the tomatoes. Let us have one more day of small, unremarkable things. The sky begins to pale in the east. August 6th arrives like every other August morning, humid, already warm, full of the weight of summer. The promises made the night before are not forgotten. They wait, ready to be fulfilled, small anchors holding people to their intentions. In a few hours, the meaning of every promise will change. The first light touches the mountains east of Hiroshima at 5:47 a.m. The city awakens gradually, in waves. Factory workers first, stumbling from their beds for the early shift. Then the shopkeepers, the bakers, the street cleaners. By 6:30, the city is in motion. Bicycles rattling over bridges, mothers lighting breakfast fires, children being roused from sleep with varying degrees of success. Emiko Tanaka wakes to the sound of her mother moving in the kitchen. The smell of miso soup, thin but genuine, drifts through the house. She lies still for a moment, remembering her mother's promise about the garden, the tomatoes. She can almost taste one already. Imagine the warm burst of sweetness, the way the juice will run down her chin. She dresses quickly in her school uniform. The white blouse is more gray now from countless washings, the navy skirt patched at the hem. Her mother has done what she can to make it presentable, but the war has aged everything. Fabric, buildings, people. The city itself looks tired, though it stands intact while others burn. At the breakfast table, Sachiko places a bowl before her daughter. The miso soup has 3 cubes of tofu floating in it, a luxury these days. Emiko knows not to ask where it came from. She knows her mother trades things, knows there's a network of women who help each other survive with small exchanges that don't appear in any official record. After school, Sachiko says, her voice carrying that particular tone of promise that mothers use. Tomorrow you can help me in the garden. We'll check if the tomatoes are ready. It is a small promise, unremarkable, the kind made 1,000 times a day across the city. I'll meet you at noon. I'll save you the last of the miso. I'll be home before dark. I'll see you tomorrow. Words that assume a future that looks like the past, that believe in the persistence of small routines, that trust in the gentle arc of ordinary days. Emiko nods, already planning which tomato she'll pick first. Her mother ties off the braid with a piece of salvaged string and pulls her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, sweet and dusty and alive. The moment stretches. Outside, the cicadas crescendo. The river flows. The evening settles into night like every other evening before it. Across the city, promises are being made. A young soldier, home on brief leave, tells his mother he'll write more often. An elderly man promises his wife he'll finally fix the sliding door that's been sticking since spring. A teacher promises her students they'll finish reading the story tomorrow, that she'll explain the ending they're all waiting.
There is a moment, infinitesimally brief, unmeasurable by human perception, when the world is suspended between what it was and what it will become. In this instant, the promises made the night before still exist. The tomatoes still hang on their vines. The mother and daughter still stand in the garden, their lives still whole, still ordinary, still moving forward in the gentle arc of expected days. Then the light. It is not like any light that has ever existed on earth before this moment. It is brighter than 1,000 suns, hotter than the surface of a star. The center of the fireball reaches temperatures of several million degrees Celsius. Everything within a kilometer of the hypocenter simply ceases to exist in any recognizable form. People are vaporized so quickly that they leave shadows on the walls behind them, dark silhouettes burned into stone and concrete, the only evidence they were ever there. Their promises evaporate with them, unspoken and unfulfilled, deleted from the world in a fraction of a second. The thermal radiation travels at the speed of light. It reaches the Tanaka garden while sound is still forming, still gathering itself to become the roar that will follow. The plants ignite. Wood begins to char human skin, exposed to this incomprehensible heat, burns to the 3rd degree instantly. Then the shockwave. It moves outward at 2 miles per second, a wall of compressed air carrying overpressures of several tons per square inch. Buildings don't collapse. They disintegrate, exploding outward in all directions as if the structures themselves are fragmenting from the inside. Roof tiles become projectiles. Windows become shrapnel. The air itself becomes a weapon, moving so fast that it tears flesh, ruptures organs, turns the human body inside out. The sound arrives last, a sound so enormous it is beyond sound, beyond hearing. It is a physical presence, a blow to the chest and skull. Those who survive the initial blast and fire will say later that the sound was the worst part, that it entered their bodies and changed something fundamental in the machinery of perception, that they heard it for years afterward in their dreams. But none of this can be understood as it happens. There is only sensation without context, experience without narrative. The mind cannot process what is happening because it has no framework for this kind of violence. This is not war as anyone has known it. This is something else entirely. Sachiko Tanaka is standing 3 kilometers from the hypocenter. Far enough that she is not vaporized. Not far enough to escape. The thermal flash burns her exposed skin, her face, her arms, the back of her neck. She doesn't understand what she's feeling because pain is a signal that the body uses to indicate damage, and the damage is happening faster than nerves can report it. The shockwave hits a second later, throwing her backward, slamming her into the remains of her house, which is in the process of disintegrating around her. Emiko was beside her mother in the garden. A meter to the left. The shockwave catches her differently, lifts her like a leaf in a hurricane, hurls her through space. She lands somewhere, she will never know exactly where. Her mind records nothing but white light, sound beyond sound, a sense of the world ending not gradually but all at once, completely, without warning or mercy. The promises made the night before are dying. The tomatoes are burning. The house is collapsing. The city is vanishing into smoke and fire and screams that are just beginning, that will not stop for hours, for days, for lifetimes. In the seconds after detonation, a mushroom cloud begins to form, rising into the stratosphere. It will become the defining image of this moment, the symbol of atomic power, but for those on the ground it is invisible. They are inside the catastrophe, not viewing it from above. All they see is darkness at noon, a darkness made of smoke and dust and debris, a darkness so complete that survivors will think night has fallen, that the sun has been extinguished. The fires begin immediately. Not from the blast, but from the thousands of cooking fires that were burning across the city at 8:16 a.m. Breakfast fires, suddenly exposed to wind and oxygen and the wreckage of combustible homes. They spread with impossible speed, joining together, creating firestorms that generate their own weather, winds that howl toward the center of the conflagration, feeding the flames with an endless supply of air and fuel. And in this hell people begin to move. Those who can. Those who are conscious. Those whose legs still work, whose lungs can still draw breath from the superheated air. They move without thinking, driven by the oldest imperative: survive. Get away from the fire. Find water. Find help. Find family. The promises surface in their minds like debris floating in a flood. I promised I would come home. I promised I would meet you. I promised we would check the tomatoes. The promises are absurd now, laughable, but they persist because they are all that remains of the world before. They are the last connection to normalcy, to the assumption that tomorrow would be like yesterday, that routines would continue, that small commitments mattered. Sachiko's first conscious thought, emerging from the shock and pain and confusion, is a single word: Emiko. The promise she made, to check the garden together. The promise that was seconds away from being fulfilled when the world ended. She tries to stand and cannot. Her legs are burned, possibly broken. The house is gone. The garden is gone. Everything is smoke and fire and the screaming of thousands. She calls her daughter's name. The sound is swallowed by larger sounds, Buildings collapsing, gas lines exploding, the roar of fire consuming everything that will burn. She calls again. And again. The promise becoming a prayer, the words becoming meaningless, just sound, just the assertion that she is alive and her daughter must be too, must be, because anything else is unthinkable. Around her, Hiroshima is dying. 70,000 people will be dead by the end of the day. Another 70,000 will die slowly, from injuries, from radiation poisoning, from the invisible damage that the bomb has done to the cells in their bodies, damage that will kill them in hours or days or years. The survivors will carry the wounds forever. Physical scars, psychological scars, genetic damage that will pass to their children and grandchildren. But in this moment, in the immediate aftermath, there is only chaos. Only the breakdown of every system that holds society together. Only individuals trying to survive, trying to find loved ones, trying to make sense of something that cannot be made sense of. The promises are broken. All of them. Every small commitment made the night before, every assumption of continuity, every belief in tomorrow. The world has split in two, before and after, and the chasm between them is unbridgeable. Those who survive will spend the rest of their lives trying to explain this moment to those who weren't there. They will fail. Language was not designed for this. Words like bomb and explosion are inadequate. They describe conventional experience, human-scaled violence. This was something else. This was the sun brought to earth. This was the end of the world compressed into a single instant and a single city. The light is fading now, replaced by smoke darkness. The screaming continues. And somewhere in the wreckage, a mother searches for her daughter, repeating a name, remembering a promise, clinging to the thread of hope that seems increasingly like madness as the fires spread and the reality of what has happened begins to penetrate the shock. The first hours after the bombing are a descent into a landscape that exists outside normal human experience. Hiroshima has become a geography of the dead and dying, a place where the basic categories of life have collapsed. There are no longer civilians and soldiers, adults and children, homes and streets. There is only destruction so total that it erases the distinctions that make society possible. Sachiko moves through this landscape in a state between consciousness and delirium. Her burns are severe, the skin on her arms hangs in sheets, her face feels simultaneously frozen and on fire. Her hearing is damaged from the shockwave, everything sounds distant, muffled as if she's underwater. But she can still move. She can still search. She calls Emiko's name with a voice that no longer sounds like her own. The smoke is so thick that visibility is measured in feet. Bodies lie everywhere. Some clearly dead, some moving weakly, some making sounds that are almost worse than silence. She steps around them, over them, through them. There is no path that doesn't require walking on human wreckage. The living envy the dead in moments like this. Those who died instantly never knew what happened. They went from morning routine to non-existence without the interval of suffering. But those who survive face an ordeal that will define the rest of their lives, however long or short those lives prove to be. Thousands are walking toward the rivers, driven by thirst and the instinct that water means safety. The 7 rivers of Hiroshima are choked with bodies, people who reached the water and couldn't go any further, who drank and died, who drowned in their desperation to escape the heat. The water itself is hot, choked with debris and ash, but the living keep coming, keep wading in, keep drinking water that may be more contaminated than the air. Sachiko makes her way toward what used to be the school. It's gone. The building that stood for 30 years is now a scatter of charred timber and bent metal. The playground where children gathered every morning is a field of rubble. She stands there, swaying, her mind refusing to process what her eyes see. A woman appears beside her. Or perhaps she's been there all along and Sachiko is only now registering her presence. The woman's face is burned beyond recognition. Her clothes have been blasted off, leaving only the waistband of her skirt. She is holding something cradled in her arms like a baby. It takes Sachiko a moment to realize it's a dead child, and another moment to realize the child's skin has melted onto the woman's arms, fusing them together. "Have you seen a girl?" Sachiko asks. 7 years old. She was wearing, but she can't remember what Emiko was wearing. School uniform? Had she changed into something else? The memory is gone, burned away or simply inaccessible through the fog of shock. The woman looks at her with eyes that see nothing. She doesn't answer. She keeps walking, carrying her burden toward the river, toward water that cannot help, cannot heal, cannot undo what has been done. The day progresses in a kind of terrible slow motion. The fires spread. The smoke gets thicker. More people emerge from the wreckage, walking wounded, stumbling through the ruins in search of family, water, shelter, understanding. Some are so badly burned that their skin hangs from their arms like clothes, so they hold their arms out in front of them like sleepwalkers, trying to prevent the skin from tearing further. Children wander alone, calling for parents who are dead or searching elsewhere. Parents wander calling for children. The search becomes a chorus of names, of pleas, of prayers. The promises made the night before echo through the ruins. "I'll see you tomorrow, I'll be home before dark, I'll meet you at noon." All these confident predictions of a future that no longer exists. Sachiko continues searching, though she's no longer sure what she's searching for. The Emiko she's looking for was a child in a world that had rules, that had breakfast and school and gardens where tomatoes grew. That world is gone. If her daughter is alive, she's alive in this new world, this place of ash and screaming and the smell of burning flesh that will never leave the nostrils of anyone who breathes it. She finds herself at what used to be the communications cable factory where Haruko worked. The building is a skeleton of twisted steel. Among the wreckage, she sees a woman's arm, still wearing the blue sleeve of a factory uniform. There's a watch on the wrist. It stopped at 8:16. Everything stopped at 8:16. Haruko had promised her sister she would visit after her shift. She had kept that promise, had gone to see her niece and nephew, had kissed their foreheads and promised to bring them something sweet. The bombing happened while she was walking home. She was on the Aioi Bridge when the flash came. There's nothing left of her now except ash and the memory of promises made, of small acts of love that seemed so ordinary they hardly required mentioning. By evening, the nature of what has happened is beginning to penetrate the shock. This was not a regular bomb. This was something new, something unprecedented. The destruction is too complete, too uniform, radiating out from a central point with mathematical precision. One bomb, people whisper. One plane, one bomb, the whole city gone. It seems impossible, but the evidence is everywhere. Rescue efforts begin, but they are hopelessly inadequate. There are too many injured, too few doctors, too few supplies. Hospitals that weren't destroyed in the blast are overwhelmed within hours. Patients lie in hallways, in gardens, in the streets. There's no morphine, no antibiotics, no way to treat burns that cover half of someone's body. Doctors and nurses make impossible choices. Who gets the limited medicine, who gets attention, who is left to die because there's simply no hope. And still the search continues. Sachiko moves through the night, now fever-bright from infection, from radiation poisoning she doesn't know she has. She calls Emiko's name into the darkness. Other voices call other names. The city is a chorus of loss, of promises that cannot be kept, of futures that have been amputated. She doesn't find her daughter that night or the next day or the next. The search becomes her existence, the thread that keeps her tethered to the act of living. As long as she's searching, Emiko might be found. As long as the promise remains unfulfilled, hope remains possible, however faint. But with each day the chances diminish. Bodies are being cremated in mass burnings because there's no other way to handle the dead. No time, no resources, no ground untouched by contamination. Families gather what remains they can find and say goodbye to people who died instantly or slowly, who had names and histories and promises they were trying to keep. The world beyond Hiroshima learns what happened in pieces, in fragments. The American military releases a statement about a special bomb of unprecedented power. Japanese officials, seeing the destruction, cannot comprehend the scale. The word atomic means nothing to most people. They have no context for it, no way to understand that the very atoms of matter have been weaponized, that humans have learned to split the nucleus and unleash the binding energy of the universe itself. In the weeks that follow, survivors begin to die of radiation poisoning, a death as cruel as the blast itself, but slower. Purple spots appear on their skin. Their hair falls out. They bleed from their gums, their noses, their eyes. Their white blood cell counts plummet. They develop fevers and nausea and diarrhea that strips them down to skeletal parodies of themselves. And then they die, weeks after surviving the initial bombing, killed by damage they can't see to cells they didn't know existed. Sachiko lasts 19 days. The burns become infected. The radiation destroys her bone marrow, her ability to heal, her body's defenses against disease. She dies in a makeshift hospital, still asking about her daughter, still remembering the promise about the tomatoes, about checking the garden together, about one more ordinary day. She never finds Emiko. She dies not knowing if her daughter survived, if she's somewhere else searching, if she died quickly or slowly, alone or surrounded by others. The not knowing is perhaps the worst part. The promise left forever in suspension, neither kept nor broken, just abandoned by the destruction of the world where such promises had meaning. In the months after August 6th, the true scope of what happened begins to emerge from the smoke and confusion. Hiroshima is gone, not damaged, not partially destroyed, but fundamentally erased as a functioning city. 78,000 buildings in an area of 13 square miles have been destroyed or damaged beyond use. The population of 350,000 has been cut nearly in half, and thousands more will die in the weeks and months to come. But numbers cannot capture what has actually been lost. Numbers describe quantity, not quality. They count bodies but not the relationships between them, the promises that connected them, the small daily interactions that made them human. Every death represents a collapse of a network. Family members who will never reunite, friends who will never complete conversations, lovers who will never fulfill pledges made in quieter times. The survivors face a different kind of ordeal. Physical recovery is the least of it. Burns heal, bones mend, even some of the radiation damage can be survived. But the psychological wounds, the moral injuries, the fundamental disruption of their sense of how the world works, these do not heal. They transform. There's a term that emerges among the survivors, hibakusha. It means explosion-affected people, but it becomes something more, an identity, a permanent marking. To be hibakusha is to have survived the unsurvivable, to carry in your body and memory an experience that cannot be shared with those who weren't there. It creates a kind of permanent exile from normal human society, even among those who are sympathetic. Many survivors cannot speak about what happened. The memories are too visceral, too overwhelming. When they close their eyes, they see the flash, feel the heat, hear the screaming. They smell burning flesh whenever they cook food. They flinch at sudden bright lights. They cannot look at children without seeing the ones who died, who were vaporized or burned or crushed, who called for parents who could not save them. The promises haunt them most of all. Every survivor carries a burden of broken commitments. The mother who promised to come home but died in the factory. The father who promised to write but never had the chance. The teacher who promised to finish the story. The friend who promised to meet at noon. These small pledges, which once seemed like the most forgettable aspects of daily life, become unbearable in retrospect. They represent the last words, the final assurance that the future existed, that tomorrow would come. Some survivors are consumed by guilt, not for anything they did but for the randomness of their survival. They were in the right place, behind the right hill, inside the right building. They lived while others, just as deserving, just as innocent, died for no reason except geography and timing. This survivor's guilt is a special kind of torture because it has no resolution. There's nothing they could have done differently, no choice they could have made that would have saved the others. They live with the knowledge that their survival is meaningless, arbitrary, unfair. In the immediate aftermath, American authorities prohibit reporting on the human effects of the bombing. Journalists who try to reach Hiroshima are turned back. Film footage of the destruction and the victims is confiscated. The official narrative focuses on military necessity, on shortening the war, on saving American lives that would have been lost in an invasion. The human cost, the specific individual suffering of real people, is suppressed, delayed, kept from public consciousness. But the stories leak out anyway. Survivors begin to share their experiences, first tentatively, then with growing urgency. They realize they have become witnesses to something unprecedented, that their testimony is the only record of what it means to experience atomic warfare from the ground, from inside the inferno. They speak even though the words are inadequate, even though the memories are traumatic, because someone has to remember. Someone has to say what was lost. 3 days after Hiroshima, a second atomic bomb destroys Nagasaki. 70,000 more dead. Hundreds of thousands more hibakusha. The message is clear. This was not an isolated demonstration. This is a weapon that can be used again and again, against any target, with devastating efficiency. The age of atomic warfare has begun. Japan surrenders on August 15th. The war that killed millions, displaced tens of millions more, reshaped the global order. That war is over. But for the hibakusha, the war continues. It continues in their bodies, in their memories, in their relationships. They are living evidence that some events are so catastrophic they cannot be relegated to history. They remain present, active, ongoing. The physical city of Hiroshima begins to rebuild almost immediately. Survivors who have nowhere else to go return to the ruins and start constructing shelters from salvaged materials. Within months, a city of shacks rises among the debris. Within years, proper construction begins. The rivers are cleaned, the streets cleared, modern buildings erected. The visible scars are gradually erased. But the invisible scars remain. Radiation contamination will persist in the environment for decades. Survivors will develop cancers at higher rates for the rest of their lives. Children exposed in utero will be born with defects. The genetic damage may pass to future generations, a poisonous inheritance from a single morning in August. The world changes too. The atomic bomb becomes the defining weapon of the post-war era. Nations race to acquire their own nuclear arsenals. The logic of deterrence takes hold. The idea that the weapon is so terrible that possessing it prevents its use, that the promise of mutual destruction guarantees peace. It's a strange inversion of the promises made in Hiroshima on August 5th. Those were promises of continuity, of ordinary tomorrows. These new promises are threats. If you destroy us, we will destroy you. The promise of the future becomes the promise of apocalypse. Emiko Tanaka's story has no clear ending because her fate is unknown. She was 7 years old on the morning of August 6th. She was in a garden with her mother when the bomb detonated. After that, nothing is certain. She might have died instantly. She might have survived with injuries and died later. She might have been one of the wandering children who ended up in orphanages, who grew up not knowing their names or their families because the trauma had erased their memories. Or she might have survived intact, grown up, lived a full life as a hibakusha, carrying the memory of her mother's promise about the tomatoes, about the garden, about tomorrow. If she did survive, she never found her mother. She never learned what happened in those final moments. The promise remains suspended, unfulfilled, a ghost haunting the rest of her life. The same is true for tens of thousands of families. The bombing didn't just kill people, It shattered relationships, severed connections, left countless loose threads that could never be tied off. The searching continued for years, missing person notices posted in newspapers, inquiries made to hospitals and orphanages, desperate attempts to find any trace of loved ones who vanished in the smoke. Some were found. Many were not. The uncertainty became another kind of death, another kind of loss. Better to know, survivors said, even if the news is terrible. Better to have a body to bury, a place to mourn, closure. The promises that were broken at least have a definitive end. The promises left in limbo, those are the ones that never stop hurting. 79 years later, the promises made on August 5, 1945 still echo through Hiroshima. The city has been rebuilt, reborn, transformed into a thriving modern metropolis of over 1 million people. But at its heart is a memorial park, a zone where the reconstruction stopped, where the ruins were preserved as a reminder of what happened here. The atomic bomb dome, the skeletal remains of the former Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, stands as it did after the blast, frozen in time, a monument to destruction. It's one of the few structures that survived close to the hypocenter, preserved through deliberate choice. Around it, the Peace Memorial Park spreads across acres where thousands died, where the promises were broken, where the world split into before and after. Visitors come from around the world to see this place, to try to comprehend what happened here. They walk through the museum, look at the artifacts, a charred lunchbox, a stopped watch, a shadow on stone, a child's tricycle. They read the testimonies of survivors, look at the photographs of the destroyed city, stand before the scale model that shows the extent of the destruction. They try to imagine it, to feel it, to understand. They cannot. This is not a failure of empathy or imagination. It's a fundamental truth about extreme experience. It cannot be fully transmitted to those who weren't there. The Hibakusha knew this. They spoke anyway, wrote memoirs, gave interviews, shared their stories not because they believed people would truly understand, but because the alternative, silence, forgetting, was worse. Someone had to remember. Someone had to bear witness. Many Hibakusha spent decades in silence before they could speak. The trauma was too immediate, too raw. Some never spoke at all. They lived ordinary lives or tried to, carrying their extraordinary burden privately. They married, had children, worked jobs, went through the motions of normal existence while inside they remained forever in that moment when the light came, when the world ended, when all the promises were broken at once. For those who did speak, the act of testimony was both burden and necessity. Each time they told their story they had to relive it, had to return to August 6th and inhabit again the fear, the pain, the confusion, the loss. But each time they spoke, they also honored the dead, gave meaning to their survival, insisted that what happened mattered, that it could not be reduced to statistics or strategic considerations. The children of Hibakusha grew up with the legacy of that day. Many absorbed it without being directly told, picking up on their parents' silences, their fears, their particular way of holding the world at a distance. Some parents never told their children they were Hibakusha, afraid of the stigma, afraid of passing on the trauma. Others made it central to their family identity, a reminder of what humans are capable of doing to each other, a warning that had to be heeded. The promise about the tomatoes, Sachiko's small assurance to her daughter that they would check the garden together, becomes, in retrospect, a symbol of all the broken promises of that day. It was such a small thing. Unremarkable. The kind of commitment parents make to children 1,000 times without thinking. But it represented a worldview, an assumption that tomorrow would come, that the ordinary rhythms of life would continue, that promises could be kept because the world was stable enough to allow it. That worldview died on August 6th. Not just in Hiroshima but everywhere. The atomic bomb announced a new era. One in which human beings possessed the power to end civilization, to render the planet uninhabitable, to break all promises forever by destroying the future itself. The knowledge changed everything. It changed how nations related to each other, how people thought about war, how they conceived of safety and danger. The promise of nuclear deterrence, that the weapons would prevent their own use, has held so far. No atomic weapons have been used in warfare since Nagasaki. But the promise is fragile, maintained by a combination of luck, wisdom, and the deterrent effect of knowing what these weapons actually do to human bodies, to cities, to societies. The Hibakusha have been central to maintaining that knowledge, to keeping the horror vivid and immediate rather than letting it fade into abstraction. Every year on August 6th, a memorial ceremony is held in Hiroshima. A bell is rung at 8:16 a.m., the moment of detonation. A minute of silence follows. Thousands gather, survivors, family members of the dead, officials, visitors. The ritual is repeated year after year, a promise to remember, to honor the dead, to work toward a world where such weapons are never used again. But the ranks of the Hibakusha are thinning. They are old now, in their 80s and 90s, dying of natural causes and of the long-term effects of radiation exposure that has finally caught up with them. Each death diminishes the pool of direct testimony, moves the bombing one step further from living memory toward historical event. There's an urgency in their final testimonies. They know they are the last generation who can say, I was there. I saw it. I felt it. This is what it does. After them, the knowledge becomes second-hand, mediated through recordings and documents and memorials. It becomes easier to abstract, to theorize about, to forget the human reality of. Some survivors made it their mission to speak to as many people as possible before dying. They visited schools, gave interviews, wrote books. They stood in the Peace Memorial Park and told their stories to strangers, over and over, bearing witness until their voices gave out. They did it not for themselves but for the dead, for the future, for the slim hope that their testimony might prevent it from happening again. Others lived quietly, never speaking publicly, carrying their experience like a private wound. They are no less important. Their silence speaks too, of trauma so deep it cannot be expressed, of a survival that came at a cost too high to calculate, of a promise to themselves to somehow continue living despite having seen the worst that humans can do. The tomatoes in Sachiko's garden burned on August 6th. But tomatoes grew again in Hiroshima. The city recovered its agriculture, its gardens, its ordinary rhythms. Life insisted on continuing, on pushing through the contamination and the trauma and the grief. Children were born. Trees grew. The rivers, once choked with corpses, ran clear again. But the promise remains broken. Sachiko never got to check the garden with Emiko. Whatever happened to Emiko, whether she died quickly or slowly, whether she survived or perished, whether she remembered her mother's promise or forgot everything in the chaos, that particular future was destroyed. The specific tomorrow that Sachiko imagined on August 5th never arrived. It exists only in memory now, in the testimony of what was lost. This is what the atomic bomb took from Hiroshima. Not just lives, not just buildings, but the future itself. It took the ordinary expectation that tomorrow would come, that promises could be kept, that the world would remain recognizable. It introduced a rupture into human history, a before and after so stark that nothing could bridge it. The memorial in Hiroshima is not just for those who died on August 6th and in the months that followed. It's for what died with them, a kind of innocence about human capability, a belief in limits, a sense that some things were too terrible to be done. The bomb proved that humans would do anything they were capable of doing, that technical possibility would override moral restraint, that the promise of victory or the fear of defeat could justify any level of destruction. And yet, the survivors also testified to something else. To resilience, to the persistence of compassion even in extremis, to the ability of humans to endure unendurable things and still choose to live, to love, to hope. The Hibakusha rebuilt their city, rebuilt their lives. They raised children who raised children. They created beauty in the midst of devastation. They made new promises, knowing full well how fragile promises are, how easily the world can end them. The children born to Hibakusha parents carry an inheritance they did not choose. Some carry it in their genes, increased susceptibility to cancers, to developmental problems, to illnesses that emerge across generations. The radiation that struck their parents on August 6th continues to echo through the DNA, through the cellular machinery of life, causing damage that persists long after the visible wounds have healed. But the inheritance is not just genetic. It's psychological, cultural, moral. It's growing up in a household where the war is never really over, where August 6th is always present, where the ordinary sounds and sights of life can trigger memories of the bombing. It's learning to recognize the signs, when a parent falls silent, when their gaze goes distant, when they're not really present even though they're sitting right there. Many children of survivors report a particular kind of childhood. Overprotective parents who couldn't bear to let them out of sight, who saw danger in every common activity, who held them too tightly because they'd already lost too much. Or the opposite. Parents who were emotionally absent, who survived physically but were destroyed psychologically, who could not form normal attachments because attachment meant vulnerability to loss. The promises made to these children often had an edge of desperation. I will protect you. I will never let that happen to you. I will give you the life I didn't have. These were not casual commitments but vows spoken against the memory of broken promises, of children who were not protected, who did not have lives to live, who died before their mothers could check the garden with them. Keiko Ogura is one such child. She was 8 years old on August 6th, a year older than Emiko Tanaka. She survived the bombing and spent her childhood among the ruins, among the dying, among the survivors who were trying to rebuild. She grew up to become one of Hiroshima's most dedicated peace activists, spending decades telling her story, translating for foreign visitors, working to ensure that the memory of the bombing does not fade. She speaks about the promises in her testimony. The promise her father made to come home from the factory. He kept it, arriving at their house burned and bleeding but alive. The promise she made to her younger siblings that everything would be okay, a lie but one she felt she had to tell. The promise she made to herself as a young survivor, looking at the devastation, that she would help prevent this from happening again. That last promise, the promise to prevent nuclear war, has animated the Hibakusha movement for decades. It's a promise made in the face of enormous obstacles, political realities, human nature itself. The weapons exist. The knowledge exists. 9 countries now possess nuclear arsenals capable of destroying civilization. The promise of never again feels increasingly fragile in a world where the weapons keep proliferating, where deterrence remains the dominant strategy, where the memory of what these weapons actually do fades with each passing year. But the survivors keep trying. They speak at the United Nations, at peace conferences, at schools and universities around the world. They share their testimonies, show their scars, describe what it was like to live through the unsurvivable. They know they are fighting against entropy, against forgetting, against the human tendency to abstract away from difficult truths. The younger generations in Hiroshima have a complicated relationship with this inheritance. They are proud of their city's resurrection, its transformation into a symbol of peace and recovery. But they also sometimes chafe against the weight of memory, the responsibility of being from Hiroshima, the expectation that they will carry forward the anti-nuclear message. Some embrace it fully, becoming activists and educators like their parents and grandparents. Others seek escape, wanting to be known for something other than the bombing, wanting their city to be defined by its present and future rather than its past. Both responses are understandable. Both are ways of trying to honor the dead while living in the world that exists now. The promises of reconstruction have largely been kept. Hiroshima is a thriving city, economically vibrant, culturally rich. The rivers are beautiful. Parks and gardens flourish. Children grow up with opportunities their grandparents couldn't have imagined. The physical recovery is nearly complete. You could visit Hiroshima today and, away from the memorial park, not know that anything terrible had happened here. But the emotional and moral recovery is ongoing, perhaps permanent. The scars are internal now, carried in memory and testimony rather than inscribed on the landscape. The city has made a choice to remember rather than forget, to keep the wound visible even as it heals, to make the bombing central to its identity rather than something to move past. This choice has consequences. It means every anniversary is a reopening of grief. It means the trauma is passed down deliberately, carefully, as a kind of sacred trust. It means that Hiroshima's children grow up with a particular burden, to remember, to testify, to work for peace even when peace seems impossible. Some wonder if this is fair, if it's right to place such weight on new generations. But the alternative, forgetting, moving on, treating the bombing as just another historical event, feels like a betrayal of the dead, a breaking of the implicit promise that their suffering would mean something, would change something, would prevent it from happening again. The promise about the tomatoes echoes through these generations too, though most don't know the specific story. They know the shape of it, the small promise made the night before, the assumption of ordinary continuation, the shattering of that assumption by the bomb. Every survivor has a version of this story, a specific last promise that was broken, a particular future that never arrived. These stories accumulate, creating a kind of collective testimony. The bombing wasn't just an event that happened to a city. It happened to hundreds of thousands of individuals, each with their own promises, their own plans, their own assumptions about tomorrow. Each death was a world ending, each survival a world transformed. The city's destruction was composed of all these individual catastrophes, layered on top of each other, creating a tapestry of loss so vast it can barely be comprehended. The Hibakusha who are still alive in 2024 are in their 80s and 90s now. They know their time is limited. They speak with increasing urgency about the need to remember, to learn, to never allow this to happen again. They have lived through the entire nuclear age, from its violent birth in August 1945 to the present, where thousands of weapons still exist, where the possibility of use remains real, where the promises of deterrence and non-proliferation feel increasingly fragile. Their final promise is to the future: remember us. Remember what happened here. Remember that these weapons are not abstractions or statistics but instruments of human suffering on a scale that defies imagination. Use our testimony. Let our pain serve some purpose. Make sure that the last promise made before the bombing, all those small, ordinary promises of ordinary people on the eve of catastrophe, make sure they are not forgotten. It's a heavy promise to accept. But the alternative is worse. A world where Hiroshima fades into history, where the atomic bomb becomes just another weapon, where the specific horror of August 6th loses its power to shock and restrain. The survivors know this. They've watched the decades pass, watched the Cold War come and go, watched new nuclear powers emerge, watched the weapons become more sophisticated and more numerous. They've kept their promise to remember. They've shared their testimony. They've built memorials and museums and peace movements. They've done everything they can to ensure that future generations understand what these weapons do, what they cost, what they destroy beyond buildings and bodies. Now the promise passes to those who come after. The children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of the Hibakusha. The visitors to the memorial park. The students who read the testimonies. The citizens of countries with nuclear arsenals. All of us, inheritors of a world where the power to end civilization exists and persists, where the promise of mutual destruction keeps an uneasy peace, where the memory of Hiroshima is all that stands between us and forgetting what we're actually threatening when we threaten nuclear war. The tomatoes never ripened in Sachiko's garden. But in gardens all over Hiroshima, tomatoes grow every summer, red and sweet and ordinary. Life continues despite everything. Promises are made and kept and broken as they have always been. But the shadow of that August morning lingers, a reminder that some promises, the promise of tomorrow, of continuity, of a recognizable future, are more fragile than we like to believe. Today, if you stand in the Peace Memorial Park in Hiroshima on a quiet morning, you can almost hear it, the echo of all those last promises made before the bombing. They're not literal sounds, but something felt in the air, in the weight of the place, in the accumulated grief and memory of 79 years. The atomic bomb dome stands as it did in the immediate aftermath, skeletal and strange, a ghost of architecture. Around it, the park is immaculate, carefully tended gardens, memorial monuments, the museum where artifacts tell stories that words cannot fully convey. It is beautiful and terrible, a place of mourning that insists on being witnessed. Every year millions visit. They come from Japan and from around the world. They walk through the museum, read the testimonies, look at the photographs of shadows burned into stone, of keloid scars, of children with radiation sickness. They stand before the cenotaph for the atomic bomb victims, which holds the names of everyone known to have died from the bombing, a number that still grows as more survivors die of radiation-related illnesses decades later. The flame of peace burns continuously in the park, and will continue to burn until all nuclear weapons are eliminated from the earth. It's a promise of sorts, that the work is not finished, that the memory serves a purpose, that the dead are not forgotten while the weapons still exist. On August 6th each year the ceremony draws crowds. Survivors come if they are able. Family members of the dead come to honor their loss. Officials make speeches about peace, about the need for nuclear disarmament, about Hiroshima as a warning to the world. The bell rings at 8:16 a.m. Silence falls. In that silence, the past and present collapse into each other, and for a moment, everyone present is standing in both times, the peaceful park of today and the burning city of August 6, 1945. The youngest survivors are now in their 80s. Each year there are fewer of them. Each year, the direct testimony becomes more precious because it's more scarce. Organizations scramble to record every remaining survivor, to preserve their stories before they're gone. Virtual reality projects recreate the bombing, trying to capture something of the visceral experience for generations who will never meet a hibakusha. But something is inevitably lost in the translation from living memory to historical record. The survivors know this. They can see it in the eyes of young people who listen politely to their stories but cannot truly grasp what they're describing. How could they? How can someone who has only known peace understand total war? How can someone who has never seen a city destroyed understand what it means when all the promises break at once? Yet the survivors persist in speaking because they have no choice. They made a promise to the dead, to each other, to the future. They promised to remember, to testify, to warn. They've kept that promise for nearly 8 decades now, through pain and illness and grief, through the exhaustion of repeatedly reliving the worst moments of their lives for the education of others. The last promise made before the bombing was actually many promises, thousands of them, all the small commitments that ordinary people make to each other in the course of ordinary life. Most were never kept. The people who made them died, or the people they made them to died, or the world changed so completely that the promise no longer made sense. A mother's promise to check the garden with her daughter. A worker's promise to finish a report. A soldier's promise to write home. A teacher's promise to finish reading a story. These promises dissolve in atomic fire like everything else: flesh, wood, stone, hope. But they don't disappear entirely. They persist in the testimony of survivors, in the memorial park, in the collective memory of what was lost. They become a kind of witness to the normal world that existed before the bomb, a reminder that the hundreds of thousands who died were not just statistics but individuals with plans, relationships, futures they were trying to build. The promise of nuclear deterrence, that possessing the weapons prevents their use, has held for 79 years. It's the longest-running promise of the nuclear age and the most important. But it's also the most fragile, dependent on the rationality of leaders, on functional communication systems, on the absence of miscalculation or accident. It's a promise maintained by fear, by the memory of what happened to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, by the understanding that these weapons cannot be used without triggering consequences that no one can truly control. The hibakusha have been essential to maintaining that promise. Their testimony has made the abstract concrete, has put human faces on the statistics, has shown what nuclear weapons actually do beyond the mushroom cloud and the strategic calculations. When politicians speak casually about nuclear options, the survivors are there to remind them of the reality, the suffering, the long-term consequences that last generations. But as the survivors pass away, who will carry that promise forward? Who will maintain the memory with enough vividness to shock, to restrain, to prevent forgetting? This is the question that haunts Hiroshima now, in 2024, as the last generation of direct witnesses ages and fades. The children and grandchildren of survivors are stepping into this role, becoming what they call memory keepers, people who did not experience the bombing themselves but who carry the testimony forward, who tell the stories of their parents and grandparents, who work to ensure that the memory does not die with the last hibakusha. It's a different kind of promise than the ones made on August 5, 1945. Those were promises about tomorrow, about ordinary continuity. These new promises are about memory, about history, about ensuring that what happened in Hiroshima is never repeated. They're promises made in full awareness of how fragile they are, how dependent on the continued commitment of people who were not there, who did not see, who can only imagine. But they are promises nonetheless. And they are being kept, day after day, year after year, by people who have chosen to bear this particular burden, to carry this particular memory, to honor the dead by working for the living. Sachiko Tanaka's promise to her daughter about checking the tomatoes together was never kept. But it was not forgotten. It exists in the archive of testimony, in the collective memory of broken promises that defines August 6th. It stands for all the ordinary futures that were destroyed, all the small plans that never came to fruition, all the tomorrows that never arrived. In a garden somewhere in Hiroshima today, tomatoes are ripening. A mother and daughter might check them together, might pick the ones that are ready, might savor the sweetness and the simple pleasure of a promise kept. They can do this because the city was rebuilt, because life continued, because the survivors chose to go on living despite everything. But they do it in the shadow of what happened. They do it knowing that their city was once destroyed in an instant, that promises like theirs were once broken by the thousands, that the ordinary future is never guaranteed. They do it, perhaps, as an act of defiance. A refusal to let the bomb have the final word, an insistence that ordinary life, ordinary promises, ordinary love still matter even in a world where such things can be destroyed without warning. The Peace Memorial Park closes at night, but the flame continues burning. The dome stands in the darkness. The river flows past as it did before the bombing, as it has every day since. The city sleeps and wakes and goes about its business, people making promises to each other, assuming tomorrow, building futures that they hope will arrive. The echo of that August morning is always there, beneath the surface of contemporary life. It cannot be erased, should not be erased. It is a warning and a remembrance, a wound and a witness. It speaks to every generation that comes after, saying, this happened. This is what humans can do to each other. Remember. Remember. Do not let it happen again. That is the final promise of Hiroshima, the promise to remember, to testify, to use the suffering of the past to prevent the suffering of the future. It's a promise that requires constant renewal, constant effort, constant choice. It's a promise that can be broken by forgetting, by indifference, by the assumption that because it hasn't happened again it can't happen again. The last promise made before the bombing was about tomatoes, about ordinary life, about tomorrow. The promises made after the bombing are about memory, about vigilance, about ensuring that the ordinary life remains possible. They are different kinds of promises, but they are connected, both speaking to the human need to believe in the future, to plan, to hope, to continue. In the end, the echo that remains is this: the world can end in an instant. Promises can be broken beyond repair. The future we assume is more fragile than we know. But we must make promises anyway. We must plan for tomorrow anyway. We must choose to remember and to hope, to honor the dead and to serve the living, to carry the memory of what was lost while building toward what might yet be saved. The tomatoes will ripen again next summer in Hiroshima. Children will play by the rivers. Families will gather. Life will continue as it must, as it has, as we hope it always will. And beneath it all, the memory persists, of a mother and daughter who never got to check their garden together, of all the promises broken by the light, of a city that was destroyed and rebuilt, of a warning that must never be forgotten. The sun sets over Hiroshima. The flame of peace burns on. And the echo continues, will continue, must continue, as long as there are people willing to listen, to remember, to keep the promise that the dead did not die for nothing, that their suffering meant something, that we learned and will continue to learn from the terrible lesson of August 6, 1945. This is what remains: memory and promise, testimony and hope, the weight of what was lost and the commitment to what might yet be saved. The last promise made before the bombing was never kept. But it is remembered. And that, perhaps, is its own kind of keeping.